Midwest is a land of innovation and industry, whether it be the towering skyscrapers of Chicago or the fuming steel mills of Illinois and Michigan. Sometimes the innovations are as grand as the first skyscrapers erected in Chicago after the Great Fire, and sometimes it's as simple as burying a few old boats to save money building a break wall. This practice is done all over the planet, from warships such as the HMS Dragon and the IJN Harazuki, and merchant ships like the American cement fleets of World War I and II, or even Old Liberty ship hulls sunk in the 1950s and 60s which still litter the American coasts today. This video focuses on a single location where five Great Lakes bulk freighters are still buried to this day. The Burns Harbor Steel Mill, located in Burns Harbor, Indiana, was built throughout the 1960s to the dismay of environmentalists, as Bethlehem Steel bought land which had several environmentally significant sand dunes that they had been trying to protect. All of these dunes would be leveled and hauled away for construction of the steel mill. The remaining dunes, which they did not own, would eventually become the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. The plant itself is also mired in environmental and industrial catastrophe, from blast furnaces exploding to leaking 18,000 tons of lead. It is safe to say the Burns Harbor Steel Mill is the site of many tragic and disastrous things. However, one of the last things you would guess for a steel mill to be on top of sand dunes would have is a proper graveyard of steamships literally buried in front of it. Among the rocks, debris, and concrete of the mill's sea wall lies five steel-hulled, over 100-year-old steamships, all sitting either entirely or partially buried. They were all rescued from scrap yards and had their superstructures stripped down to the hull and were partially sunk to serve as large landfills for break walls. Now most of them are buried under slag, dirt, and other industrial waste. Of these vessels, there is the Princeton, the Frederick B. Wells, the Francis Wadlar, Charles Hubbard, and the Thomas Barnum. From start to finish, these vessels are listed by age, the oldest being from 1900 and the newest being from 1908. To start, I will begin with the Princeton. The Princeton was launched by the American Shipbuilding Company on July 18, 1900 at a length of 474 feet and a beam of 28 feet. She was equipped with a triple expansion steam engine and was built for the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, a newly formed fleet of vessels owned by the steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie. She would serve with this company without much note up until 1921, when she had her cargo holds rebuilt to suit the more modern arch construction design in Conneaut. She would keep serving for Pittsburgh Steam up until 1945, when she was sold to the Buckeye Steamship Company, where she would serve with them for the next 18 years, before being sold to the Rowan Steamship Company in 1963 for storage uses, and was retired from active service. Rowan would go on to lease the Princeton to the Dow Chemical Company of Vietnam War infamy to provide extra steam to their Ludington, Michigan plant. This would not last long, however, and in 1964 she was shuffled from Manitowoc, Wisconsin to Sturgeon Bay, and shortly after being towed to Sturgeon Bay, she would be sold to the Hudson Waterways, who would in turn sell her to the Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company, which sank her as a breakwater in Burns Harbor. The second vessel in this list is the Frederick B. Wells, which was launched in 1901 in Chicago, Illinois by the Chicago Shipbuilding Company at a length of 450 feet and a beam of 50. She was powered by one quadruple expansion steam engine for the Peavey Steamship Company, and she would serve with them for the next 11 years until in 1912 the fleet was transferred to G. A. Tomlinson. He would go on to sell the Wells to the Reese Steamship Company in 1916, who went on to rename her to the Otto M. Reese in 1917. In 1921, she had her cargo hold rebuilt to the modern arch design and would again receive another rebuild in 1923 in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to have her side tanks rebuilt. In 1926, she was sold to Chicago Navigation, who 5 years later would sell her to the Gartland Steamship Company, which renamed her to the Sullivan Brothers in 1934. She would continue her service without note until 1957, when she was renamed to the Henry Platt Jr. Only 2 years later, she was sold to the Pillsbury Company, yes, the one you're thinking of, which went on to cut her into a grain barge, where she was used in Buffalo, New York, and renamed a Pillsbury barge. She'd be renamed to just Pillsbury before being sold off and towed to Burns Harbor, and sunk as a break wall in 1967. Up next, the Francis Weidler was built in 1904 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Cleveland. At a length of 436 feet and a beam of 50, she was equipped with a triple expansion steam engine and was built for the Columbia Steamship Company. However, she would only be with the company for the next 12 years, as in 1916 she was sold to the Valley Steamship Company. Only 4 years later, she would be stranded on November 12, 1920, at Pancake Shoal near Whitefish Bay and considered a total loss. No one was killed in the stranding, but she was left to the underwriters as a total loss. They would go on to sell the vessel to the Canadian Matthews Steamship Company in 1921, who renamed it the Baton, where she would serve for 10 years before the fleet went into receivership. The new owner and receiver, G.T. Clarkson, would sell the Baton 2 years later in 1933 to the Colonial Steamship Company, who would go on to update her boilers to oil firing in 1947. She would keep serving with them when they changed their name from the Colonial Steamship Company to the Scott Meisner Steamship Ltd., and would be a workhorse for them up until 1966, when she cracked her propeller shaft going downbound from Fort William to Port Colborne. She would then be towed to Port Colborne, unloaded, then sold to marine salvage for scrapping, where they would remove her boilers to reuse in the 1907 built Shelter Bay, which would go on to be scrapped in 1983. And it is worth mentioning that the Shelter Bay had her pilot house and bow superstructure preserved as a maritime museum until 2016, when it was demolished with everything inside it. The remaining hull of the Baton would go on to be towed to the Burns Harbor Steel Mill and sunk to be part of the breakwall where it still sits today. Second to last is the Charles Hubbard, which was built by the Toledo Shipbuilding Company in 1907 at a length of 458 feet and a beam of 52 feet. She was powered by a quadruple expansion steam engine and was built for the L.C. Smith Transit Company to haul anything from grain and coal to iron ore. Her owners would, only after 5 years in 1911, merge with the Great Lakes Steamship Company, where she would serve this role until 1957 when the entire fleet was sold to Wilson Marine Transit Company. However, they would not hold on to her for long though, as only 4 years later she would be sold for scrap to the Afram brothers, who lit her up in Milwaukee until 1965, when they sold her to the Hudson Waterways Corporation, where she would then be traded to the U.S. Maritime Commission, who would then go on to sell her to the Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company, who would sink her as part of the breakwall and bury under slag at Burns Harbor. Thomas Barnum. Built in 1908 by the Detroit Shipbuilding Company in Wyandotte, Michigan, she was 500 feet long with a beam of 50 and was equipped with a triple expansion steam engine. She was built for the Postal Steamship Company, which she would stick with for the next 11 years until she was transferred to the Barnum Steamship Company in 1919. She would stay with them until 1935 when she was sold to Algoma Central and Hudson Bay Railroad and renamed the First Algo Steel, the first of her namesake. In 1966, she grounded at the Soo and was surveyed over winter and deemed unfit for repairs, and would then be sold for scrap in 1967, and then sold to the Great Lakes Dredge & Co. and sunk to be part of the breakwall at Burns Harbor. These 5 ships, all in various sizes, ages, and conditions, still sit buried under the slag, dirt, and sand, where they will sit for as long as they remain undisturbed. Thank you for watching and have a good day.